I keep the watch close to me, even now. Not because it tells the time. God knows I've long since lost track. But because it belonged to him. My buddy, Tommy. He was the first one I ever saved, and the last one I ever lost. I didn't understand what that choice would cost until weeks later. And I guess that's why I'm writing this now. Unsigned, because I can't carry it in my chest anymore. It was late September 1944, somewhere in northern France.D. Cold rains had turned the fields to mud, and the wind cut through the trenches like a knife. We were part of the 3rd Infantry, a small platoon cobbled together from scraps of other units, and we were moving toward a village that no one seemed to care much about on any map. I remember the smell of wet wool, sweat, and that faint tang of gunpowder that clung to everything. Tommy had this habit of tapping the side of his helmet when he was nervous. It was almost comforting, like he could knock the fear out of the air. I followed him into that mud-choked field. Boots squelching, rifles heavy, hearts heavier. Captain Reynolds had given the orders to push forward, though he barely knew the terrain himself. We all obeyed because that's what soldiers do. But I remember thinking as I watched the rain soak into his uniform, that something about the orders felt off. The recurring thing, that watch, came into play that morning. I had found it lying in the mud near an abandoned farmhouse before the patrol started. It was cracked. The glass smeared with dirt, but it still ticked. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, thinking maybe it would keep me grounded, a small thing that reminded me the world still moved, even when everything around us had stopped making sense. Tommy and I had been through a lot together in those first months. Missed rations, long night marches, the endless waiting in trenches that smelled of wet clay and old fear. He kept me laughing when I wanted to cry. And yet, I can't shake that morning. The way his eyes flicked to me when we reached the crossroads, before we saw the first German patrol. There was something unspoken there, a question we both knew but couldn't voice. Do we go along with this, or do we risk everything? I should have known then, standing in that mud, that the choice I made would define the rest of my life. It wasn't a grand decision. It was small, almost imperceptible, but the consequences, God, they were enormous. I told myself it was survival, that following orders kept everyone alive, but I still wake up sometimes, feeling the weight of what I didn't do, or what I allowed to happen. Captain Reynolds barked something then, words lost in the rain, and we moved forward. Tommy gave me that tap on the helmet, his last, I think, before the world shifted in ways I couldn't have predicted. I felt the watch against my chest, a reminder that I had no right to be here if he wasn't. There's a detail I've never told anyone, not even my wife, who held my hand as I slept fitfully for years afterward. It's tied up in that crossroads, in the mud, in the moment when a simple choice became a burden I carry still. I can feel it pressing even now, like the tick of the watch, relentless, unforgiving. I keep asking myself, would you have done differently? And I don't have an answer. Not then, not now. Because what I did, or didn't do, that morning, it isn't something I can undo. And that is where it all begins. We moved out of the barn at first light, boots sloshing through the mud that had become a permanent part of our existence. The village lay ahead, quiet and empty, but that quiet carried the kind of danger that makes a man's chest tighten for no good reason. I kept the watch in my hand now, holding it like a lifeline, each tick a reminder that time was passing, and that I still had choices to make, even if I wished I didn't. The Germans were organized, more than we expected. Machine gun fire erupted from a cluster of buildings, and men fell around us. Some crying out, some silent. Tommy stayed close, his hand brushing mine as we ducked behind a stone wall. He didn't need to say anything. I could feel the question in his eyes again. Why did you leave me? And even now, I couldn't answer. Captain Reynolds' voice was sharp, ordering flanks and suppressive fire. I obeyed, crouched low, and moved as instructed. But my mind kept returning to the farmhouse, to the moment I hesitated, to the moment I left Tommy behind. Every step forward felt like both penance and gamble. Could a single decision from days ago ripple this far, shaping life and death with invisible hands? We cleared a street, only to find civilians hiding in the rubble. Their faces pale, eyes wide. An old man peeked out from the ruins of a bakery, holding a loaf of bread, as if it were armor. I remembered the woman in the farmhouse, the mercy I gave, or took, from her. Was it the same? Would this kindness cost us now or save us later? I didn't know. A sudden explosion rocked the street, throwing mud and stone against us. Men shouted. Some cried out in pain. Tommy's grip on my arm tightened, and I realized how close we were to losing everything, how fragile life was in these moments. The watch ticked on, relentless, almost cruel, a rhythm that mocked the chaos around us. Then I saw him, a German soldier, pinned down behind a cart, rifle shaking. He looked young, no older than a boy. For a moment, the world slowed. I could have fired. I could have obeyed orders and ended it. But I hesitated. The hesitation that had defined the farmhouse, that had cost me in the hedgerow, pulsed in my chest. My finger froze on the trigger. Something whispered in the wind, faint but insistent, as if warning me, and I stepped back, letting Tommy take the shot instead. He did, without hesitation, and the moment passed. I felt relief, but relief mixed with guilt. I had survived by deferring the decision, by leaving action to someone else. The whisper lingered, like an echo of something I couldn't explain, reminding me that choices made, or avoided, never truly vanish. By nightfall, the village was ours, but the cost had been heavy. Men wounded, men dead, men staring at the mud as if it held answers they'd never find. Captain Reynolds clapped me on the shoulder, oblivious to the moral weight I carried. Tommy said nothing, just tapped his helmet, a small signal that carried more than words. I pressed the watch in my pocket again, feeling its weight like the pulse of everything I couldn't tell anyone. And that's when I first noticed it. The figure in the distance, barely visible through the smoke and fog. Not human, at least not fully, just a shape, watching, waiting. And I couldn't tell if it was real or a trick of exhaustion, of guilt, of the war pressing down. I didn't speak. I didn't move. But I couldn't stop seeing it. The night fell, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the barn we'd claimed. The watch ticked, the whispers lingered, and I realized the real battle wasn't over, not for me, not even close. The rain hadn't let up. By the time we slogged toward that crossroads, every uniform was soaked through, every boot a heavy, sucking weight of mud. I could hear the others behind me, the muffled slosh of boots and the quiet curses that passed between soldiers when nerves fray. Tommy stayed beside me, close enough that our elbows brushed in the trench-like ruts we followed. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but words felt pointless, like shouting into a storm. We reached the edge of the village and froze. Not a soul in sight except for a farmhouse at the far end, smoke curling lazily from its chimney as if life outside this war hadn't vanished. That smell, burning wood mixed with wet earth, made my stomach knot. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like a trap. I checked the watch again. The cracked glass caught a shard of gray sky, tick, tick, ticking in my jacket pocket. That sound anchored me, a small rhythm in a world otherwise off balance. Tommy glanced down, caught me fiddling with it. He smiled, just a twitch of the lips, but it was enough to calm me. We'd been through worse, we told ourselves, and yet the unease lingered. Captain Reynolds waved us forward. His voice carried over the wind and the rain, clipped and impatient. "Clear the farm. Check the house. Move fast." He didn't wait for questions. No one asked. We obeyed. That's how it was. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Dust motes floated in the gray light from the cracked windows. A kitchen table sagged under the weight of dishes left mid-meal. And then we saw her, an old woman, bent and trembling, hiding in a corner. Her eyes, wide and fearful, met ours, and in that instant I felt the weight of all the orders I'd ever followed pressed down. Tommy nudged me subtly. "She's not armed," he whispered. But the rules were the rules. Reynolds would expect us to secure the place, search every room, and if anything went wrong, if the enemy had been tipped off, there'd be blame. I didn't know then how quickly a simple decision could spiral. I could follow orders, ransack the farmhouse, scare her into silence. Or I could hesitate. I hesitated. Tommy glanced at me again, tapping his helmet lightly. That small signal, it meant trust. He trusted me to do the right thing. But what was right? To follow the law of the army? Or the law of conscience that said no harm should come to this woman because of our fear and duty? I made the choice. I held my hands still, motioned for Tommy to do the same. We didn't search further. We let her stay, hidden, as if her existence had a right to continue unexamined. The rest of the platoon cleared the farmhouse quickly, not knowing what we'd done. Captain Reynolds gave no indication that he noticed, or perhaps he did, and decided it wasn't worth pressing. That night, in the shell-scarred barn where we bivouacked, Tommy and I sat in silence. The smell of wet wool and tobacco smoke filled the air. He reached for the watch, now dirt-smudged, and held it between us like a fragile relic. "We can't tell anyone," he said softly. I nodded. That was the unspoken rule, but it gnawed at me. That one hesitation, that tiny act of mercy, it might have been nothing, or it might have been everything. I couldn't know. And the not knowing, that uncertainty, became a weight I'd carry for decades. By morning, the platoon moved on. The crossroads were behind us, but the choice lingered. I kept the watch, pocketed it, like a confession I couldn't voice, and every time it ticked, I heard a question I couldn't answer. Did I save her life, or doom someone else because of my hesitation? And then came the first shot. The fog hung thick the next morning, curling around the broken buildings like smoke from a fire long extinguished. The village was quiet, too quiet, and the air smelled of mud, cordite, and something I couldn't name, a faint sweetness that made my stomach twist. I held the watch in my hand again, feeling its cracked glass under my thumb. Each tick was a heartbeat, a reminder that time kept moving even when I felt stuck, trapped in choices I didn't know how to undo. Tommy and I moved through the ruins, scanning for signs of the enemy. He kept close, his elbow brushing mine in that silent signal that said we'd get through this, together, or not at all. I still couldn't shake the image of the German soldier from yesterday, the boy I let Tommy act for me. The hesitation gnawed at me like an old wound. Would you have done differently? I couldn't answer. Not then, not now. Then I saw it. The figure again. This time closer, emerging from the haze between two bombed-out buildings. It wasn't fully human, or at least it didn't move like one. I froze, heart hammering, and Tommy stopped beside me. His hand grazed mine, and I knew he saw it too. Though he didn't speak, Captain Reynolds' voice cut through the fog, distant but sharp. "Move. Don't let them see you hesitate." I swallowed, torn between obeying orders and staring at the thing that didn't belong, that shouldn't exist, yet was there, watching. I wanted to run, wanted to tell Tommy to run, but something held me in place. Maybe it was fear, maybe guilt, maybe the stubborn need to face the consequences of my choices. The figure didn't advance. It just watched, and in that stillness, I felt the weight of everything I'd done. The hesitation at the farmhouse, leaving Tommy in the hedgerow, letting him take the shot yesterday, all of it condensed into a single unspoken judgment. We moved cautiously, keeping low, passing by the shape without engaging, but its presence haunted me. Every step forward reminded me that survival had limits, that morality didn't always come with instructions, and that the war outside mirrored the war inside. By midday, we regrouped with the rest of the platoon. Men were battered, tired, eyes hollow. Captain Reynolds barked orders, checked maps, made plans as if none of us carried ghosts or whispers. Tommy stayed close to me, tapping his helmet in that quiet rhythm. I pressed the watch again, and it felt heavier than ever, laden with choices, guilt, and the unexplainable weight of what we had seen, and what we had avoided. That evening we found shelter in the shell of a church. Broken pews, shattered windows, the faint smell of incense lingering. I could hear the faint ticking from the watch, feel the whispering echo that had followed me since the hedgerow. I didn't speak of it to Tommy, or to anyone, but I felt it pressing, reminding me that the choices we make, or fail to make, have consequences we cannot predict. And then the whispers came again, sharper this time, almost urgent. I turned toward the ruined altar, half expecting to see the figure there waiting. I didn't move. I didn't speak, but I knew it was watching, judging, waiting, and deep down I understood. The hardest part of survival wasn't living through the bullets. It was living with what you had done, or not done, while they flew. The first shots cut through the morning mist like broken glass. I remember the smell of wet earth, the iron tang that came with gunfire, and the way my stomach dropped as if it had been left behind in the mud. We hadn't even reached the village proper before the Germans appeared. 3 of them, maybe more, firing from a hedgerow. I heard Tommy's voice shout my name, but it was muffled, swallowed by the roar of rifles and the clatter of boots on wet cobblestones. Instinct kicked in. I ducked behind a ruined wall, mud plastering my uniform, and tried to gauge how many were firing, how many of us were still alive. Tommy was beside me in a second, leaning against the same shattered stone, eyes wide. "We've got to get across," he yelled, but I felt frozen, stuck between movement and the unspoken question that had followed me since the farmhouse. Did hesitation cost someone else now? The watch ticked in my pocket. Each click felt louder than the last, a cruel metronome counting down time I could not control. I hadn't worn it at first, thinking it silly, a relic found in mud. But now, in the chaos, its rhythm anchored me, reminded me that I had to keep going, even when I wanted to run the other way, away from the responsibility pressing down like a lead weight. Captain Reynolds shouted orders, but the words were fragmented, almost drowned by gunfire. I followed the motion, the gestures, because that was what soldiers did. We ran in short bursts, dashing from cover to cover. I could feel Tommy next to me, his breath hot and wet, hand brushing mine as we scrambled through the ruins. For a moment, I wondered if this was what dying felt like, this constant surge of movement, without thought, without choice. Then it happened. A round struck nearby, and Tommy went down. I remember the sound, not loud, but devastating, like a book slammed shut in the middle of a quiet room. He didn't cry out. He just fell, and the world seemed to slow, everything narrowing to that single moment. I froze. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I didn't even consider my own survival. My hands found him instinctively, dragging him to the relative safety of a collapsed wall. I should have stayed with him, checked him over, waited for the medic. But something shifted. A tiny, almost imperceptible sense of duty to the others in the platoon, a need to obey orders, a fear I didn't fully understand. And I made the choice. I left him behind just for a second to sprint to warn the rest of the men about the hedgerow trap. That second stretched into minutes. When I finally looked back, Tommy was gone. Not wounded, not crawling. He had disappeared into the chaos. I didn't see him again that day. I don't know what happened. The rest of the platoon survived, barely. Captain Reynolds barked at us to regroup, and I did, though my hands shook, mud and blood smeared together. The watch ticked. Each sound was a question. What did I just do? Was leaving him behind the right choice? Would anyone understand? I thought of the woman in the farmhouse. Did my hesitation there, my small act of mercy, bring us here? Or was it nothing at all? Could small decisions really carry this kind of weight? Or was it just the randomness of war pressing down on my conscience? I carried the watch back through the rubble, pressed it to my chest as if its ticking could erase the memory of leaving Tommy. But it didn't. Not then. Not now. And that's when I first heard it, a faint sound, almost like a whisper above the gunfire. Something I have never been able to explain. It didn't come from any man, not from any gun. Just a sound that made me stop, just for a heartbeat, and wonder if what I'd done had consequences far beyond my comprehension. The morning air was heavy with smoke and damp, a haze that made the ruins around us look like a painting half remembered. We were moving cautiously now, platoon stretched thin, eyes scanning every shattered window, every overturned cart. The figure from the fog hadn't been seen in daylight, but I felt it, the same way you feel a shadow in the corner of a room. It pressed against my thoughts, reminding me of the crossroads, the farmhouse, the hedgerow. Every hesitation I'd taken, every choice deferred, it followed me like a debt unpaid. Tommy stayed beside me, tapping his helmet as usual. I wanted to tell him everything, to unburden myself. But the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that I'd left him once before, let a boy die in the street, let mercy shape decisions that weren't mine to shape? I couldn't. So we moved in silence, boots sinking into mud, rifles ready, hearts hammering. Captain Reynolds signaled us forward toward a cluster of buildings that looked empty, but I knew better. The silence was the loudest thing there. I had the watch in my hand, feeling the tick-tick as if it were keeping score of every choice, every failure. And then I saw him, the German soldier from the street yesterday, crouched behind a doorway. He froze when he saw me, eyes wide, trembling. I froze too. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the two of us, and I realized this was the moment where all hesitation, all deferral, all unspoken guilt collided. I could fire, I could obey orders, or I could hesitate. I hesitated. The figure in the mist appeared again, just at the edge of my vision, a shape more shadow than human. It watched. The German soldier didn't move. Tommy's hand found mine again, a small anchor. I looked at him, and in that glance, I understood. Sometimes survival isn't just keeping yourself alive. Sometimes it's deciding who deserves the mercy you can give and who doesn't. I lowered my rifle. The German didn't run. He didn't attack. He simply froze, shaking. I motioned for him to stay down, to not move. He obeyed, as if instinct told him that this American had chosen something else today. Captain Reynolds shouted from the street ahead, unaware of the scene unfolding in the doorway. "Move! Now!" I obeyed, dragging Tommy and guiding the soldier back into cover. Heart hammering, the whispering, the presence at the edge of my vision, lingered. I didn't understand it. I still don't. But for the first time, I sensed that survival and morality might not always be at odds. We regrouped. The village was quiet, eerily so. Men tended to the wounded, some staring blankly, some swearing under their breath. The German soldier we'd spared huddled against a wall, trembling, alive. I pressed the watch to my chest again. Tick, 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 tock. A rhythm that had become a heartbeat of conscience. A reminder that the choices we make, even the small ones, can ripple far beyond what we see. That night, in the shell of another barn, Tommy tapped his helmet at me one last time. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just held the watch and listened to its ticking, wondering if it could ever forgive me for the hesitations, the failures, the things I had left undone. And I knew, deep down, that the figure would be there again, watching, waiting, reminding me that some choices cannot be unmade. Because even when the battle ends, the real war never does. Not for the ones who survive. We huddled in the shell of an old barn, rain still dripping from the roof and seeping through the cracks in the walls. The platoon was battered, quiet, except for the occasional cough or whispered curse. Captain Reynolds didn't look at me when he passed. His eyes swept the group like he was counting ghosts. Maybe he was. I could feel Tommy's absence like a stone in my chest. The watch ticked steadily in my pocket. I'd started fingering it without realizing, as if it could keep time from slipping away, as if its rhythm could soothe the guilt that wouldn't leave me. Tommy's laugh, his helmet tap, the way he trusted me. Those memories hit like punches every time I thought I could breathe. I still can't explain why leaving him behind felt necessary, and I keep wondering if it's my own cowardice disguised as duty. We waited for hours, listening. The faint whisper I'd heard in the hedgerow seemed to follow me into the barn. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the broken beams. But it had a cadence, a rhythm almost like a voice, low and insistent. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't say anything to anyone. No one would understand, and talking would just make me seem unbalanced. Corporal Jenkins, the platoon's medic, finally broke the silence. "We need to move at first light," he said, checking his maps and murmuring to himself. "Enemy patrols are combing the west side. If we don't leave soon, we're walking into a trap." His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension under it. Everyone nodded, but no one moved. We were too tired, too shaken. I thought of the woman in the farmhouse again. Did she survive? Did my hesitation save her life, or condemn someone else? I still don't know. That one small choice had set off a chain I could not see, and now it felt like the world itself was pressing on me, daring me to measure the cost. At dawn, we moved. The mud sucked at our boots. Every step a reminder of the night's decisions. The hedgerow came into view, gray and jagged, and I felt that whisper again, softer now, almost urging me to look closer. I did, and there, half hidden in the brambles, was Tommy. He was alive, though shaken, dirt-streaked, and bruised. Relief hit me, but it was tangled with something else. Something I can't put into words. He hadn't seen me leave. Or maybe he had, and he didn't call out. Either way, that moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, yes. But at what cost? I helped him to his feet, and we fell in step, silent. The whisper faded as the wind carried it away, leaving only the mud, the broken trees, and the constant ticking of the watch. I pressed it again against my chest, feeling the weight of everything I'd done, everything I hadn't done, and everything I couldn't undo. And then came Captain Reynolds' voice, sharp, demanding, cutting through the fog of exhaustion. "Move faster. There's more ahead than you realized." He didn't wait for questions. He didn't care about the whisper, about the farmhouse, about what lingered between Tommy and me. He just cared that we obeyed. I glanced at Tommy. He looked back at me, eyes asking a question I couldn't answer. The crossroads, the farmhouse, the hedgerow. All of it pressed on me like a silent accusation, and deep down I knew the real trial wasn't the enemy out there, it was what I carried inside me. Because survival, I was learning, isn't always about staying alive. Sometimes it's about what you leave behind, and what you can't explain. The morning after the village fell was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Birds sang somewhere beyond the rubble, though I barely noticed them. The mud had dried into stiff gray crusts, cracking under boots as we moved through the empty streets. The platoon was ragged, exhausted, but alive. Tommy walked beside me, silent, his helmet tucked under his arm now, tapping it only when he wanted to remind me he was there. A quiet reassurance in the wake of everything. I kept the watch in my pocket, pressed against my chest. It had survived the mud, the rain, the blood, and every terrible choice I had made. It was small, cracked, almost inconsequential, and yet it held everything I could not bear to say aloud. Every hesitation, every mercy, every moment I had let fear or conscience guide me instead of orders. This watch remembered it all. Captain Reynolds never acknowledged the moments that mattered. To him, the mission was complete, the objectives met, the casualties accounted for. But I knew better. I could still see the farmhouse, the old woman, her wide, frightened eyes. I could still see the boy in the street, the German soldier I had spared. I could still feel the weight of leaving Tommy in the hedgerow, and then finding him alive, shaking, and scared. Every choice carried consequences that I could not undo. That evening, when the platoon slept, I sat alone on the steps of a ruined church, the watch ticking softly in my hand, and the figure appeared one last time, just a shadow, faint at the edge of vision, but I knew it was watching, waiting, dodging, or maybe simply witnessing. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let the presence be, as if acknowledging it could make peace with the past. Years later, I would come to understand that the war didn't end when the fighting stopped. It lingered in the choices we made, in the mercy we gave or withheld, in the small hesitations that shaped life and death. Tommy lived, and I lived, and yet I carried the burden, not because anyone forced me to, not because of medals or praise, but because the conscience of survival is not so easily set aside. The watch still ticks even now. I keep it close, because it reminds me that time moves on, whether we are ready or not, and that the moral weight of a single moment can echo far longer than the war itself. I cannot undo the choices, cannot erase the hesitations, cannot speak them aloud without breaking the fragile peace of my remaining years. But I can write this, unsigned, in the quiet hope that someone might understand. Survival is not always heroic, and courage often looks like a hand held back, a mercy given, or a single choice made in fear and conscience combined. I leave it here, not for forgiveness, not for absolution, but because I can no longer carry it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.